This better be good. So I am really excited to be here. I'm here with B.C. Williams, who is my partner and co-founder in Massive Change Network. And we are super thrilled to work with Sandy and her team. We first met Sandy because we were working with Freeman in Dallas, and we were building a center for live experience innovation right next door. That was a week before the pandemic hit. We actually broke ground. I have a silver shovel in my office, sadly. And of course, that didn't happen. But the beauty that did happen was we met Sandy, and I gave a lecture about the work that I do and the way that I think, and I showed some of the principles that we developed in our work. And when I showed those principles, afterwards, Sandy said, "You're obviously not a neuroscientist, but all those principles that you talked about are neuroscience principles. They're neuroscience ideas." And I realized that I've been trying to understand how we think for a long time, for my whole life. And so that's really the kind of substance of my work. I apply that thinking to problems all over the world. I've had an extraordinary life as a designer. I grew up in Canada, about 6 hours north of Toronto, on a farm outside of a mining town. There's not a lot of talk about design there, but we didn't have running water in the wintertime. It was minus 40 for weeks on end. My job as a young man was to go to the well in the valley and provide water to the house. But I fell in love with ideas and images and putting those things together. I realized that I discovered that is actually called graphic design, communication design. And that really led me into this world. And it happened at a time when the whole world was connecting. And I saw the computer coming before it had been introduced to the workplace. One of the first applications was typography. And it really wiped out the typographic world and replaced it with this new capacity. And so I saw it, and I began to try to understand what was really happening. And I studied that, and I became an author in the process to do the research I needed to write. And so I ended up becoming a writer and an author. I mean, a writer and a designer. And that combination is really the work that I've done. Now, I should have some slides. There we go. So that's really the work that I did. I published this book. This was the book that had those principles. These are the principles that I'm talking about. And you can see there are a lot about how we think, right? Think like you're lost in the forest. We're not separate from or above nature. Design your own economy. Design the time of your life. It's really sort of thinking about how to produce in your own mind the liberty and freedom that we need to work. So that became the kind of center of the work that we do. This is our farm, the last farm on the left. As I said, I became a designer. I've had this extraordinary adventure. I designed a 1,000-year plan for the future of Mecca. I worked with Frank Gehry, the architect, on the Walt Disney Concert Hall. I did a project on the future of design for the Vancouver Art Gallery. And I've produced about a dozen books on the changing context of design. The back cover of the book says it best. It's not about the world of design. It's about the design of the world. It's about our changing capacity to shape the world. And it's not constrained to the visual. And that's it's probably the most important thing to get into your mind over the next few days, that you are designers. You have the capacity to design. The moment that you have intent, you're a designer. If you have intention, you have a goal. You're not willing to accept random outcomes. The moment you have a goal, you're a designer. The question then is, are you a good designer? Do you get good results? Can you envision that goal effectively? Can you break it down step by step and get the goal well. So that really is what design is about. It's about that methodology, effectively visioning. It's why we call it a vision. It's visual, and then breaking it down. And you have in design a method of leadership. So that's really what it's about. What we saw in our work was that design was changing scale. If you think about the kind of old idea of design is that it's a subset of business that happens in a cultural context, and that happens within the world, the natural world. What we saw was that business, culture, and even nature are becoming design projects. And when I first did the diagram, people said, "Bruce, you're a megalomaniac. You're crazy. You just want to design everything." And I said, look, it's not about design and control. It's about responsibility. Where we fail to design, we design for failure. So we really need to design the ecologies that sustain us. And if you look around the world where we don't do that, we destroy them. So we are inspired by our work with Sandy to turn neuroscience into behavior by design. So we want to kind of build that bridge to say, this is what we know. How can we take what we know and turn it into new behavior? And one of the ideas that we developed for COP last year was the idea that we all feel the truth, that we're all now finally feeling what's happening, that the world is changing. We have to respond. There's a tidal wave of change coming, and we're finally feeling it, not just knowing it. We're feeling what's happening, and that fundamentally changes, and it changes to a new kind of level of complexity that we've never experienced before. The world has simply never had to do it. We could get away with a linear way of thinking in the past because we could solve one problem at a time. That's no longer the case. We have to think in systems. We have to think in context. We have to think in ecologies. And that takes a kind of raising up of thinking to a whole new level. And really the best people in the world to kind of think about that and understand that are the people in this room. It's really the only hope we have of dealing with that challenge. So we have 3 ways of doing that, 3 ways of kind of thinking about thinking. They are nexus thinking, system thinking, and life-centered design. I'm going to touch on all 3 of them. The first is nexus thinking. We published a book last year called The Nexus, and it's about the intersection of art, technology, and science. What happens if you can bring those worlds together? Mostly they're pushed apart. They've developed different languages, protocols, incentives, labels, all kinds of differences that really keep them apart. When in fact what we need to do to succeed is pull them together. And so I've been working with Julio Tino, my co-author on the project, on this for about 13 years. Julio and I live across the street from each other, so we have coffee every Sunday, and we've been doing that for 13 years. And we finally finished it during the pandemic. But if you think about emergence, designing for complexity, it's counter to everything we think about in leadership and business and design. Because it's all about control. It's about knowing everything, knowing and predicting outcomes, knowing exactly what's going to happen, designing it. This is the opposite. This is about designing a kind of system that has freedom in the system and distributes power and produces even better results. And it is about design as an empowerment practice, because that's what design really is. So if you look at this diagram, you see that the kind of 3 domains of science, technology, and art have 3 fundamentally different modes: discovery, invention, and creation. And it takes the kind of mind across all those dimensions, from analytical to metaphorical. You need that kind of full domain. And that it is, in our world, it's design as a practice that on a day-to-day basis delivers that kind of day-to-day synthesis of those three worlds. And so for us, it's really about kind of developing another pair of glasses. If you're a scientist, how do I look through the world, through a new pair of glasses, and see the world of an artist, or see the world of a technologist, and really see what's possible in a different way? The second is systems thinking. We published this book called Incorporations, And for me, I didn't really understand how important it was when we did it, which was, I think, around 2006. But it was about how there is no discrete object, that everything in the world is taken up, is actually made of a kind of agglomeration, an incorporation of things that are at a smaller scale, and is itself incorporated into systems at a higher scale. So you have to kind of think of this incorporation happening at all different scales. And so when we think about discrete objects, that we can kind of take an object out of that and solve it, it's really not plausible. You really need to think in context. And what happens is that when we solve it, when we do the old way, we create externalities. And those externalities, cause all kinds of havoc. We're paying the price for it now. So when we design a car, we don't think about all the other problems that car creates. Those are externalities. It's someone else's problem. We don't have to deal with it. But that is the old way. The new way is to think ecology, think systems. Think about, building hotels is the old way. Airbnb is the new way. They're the biggest hospitality company in the world. They own zero real estate. Taxis are the old way. Rideshare is the new way. They have, the old way is a kind of scarcity model that creates a kind of slave labor. The new system liberates dead capital, liberates dead assets, cars sitting idle, and people with free time. And you have this kind of new world. These are ecosystem design. They're designed at a different scale, right? So that's kind of system thinking design. And then the third is life-centered design. So remember Ptolemy and Copernicus? Ptolemy said, we are at the center of the universe. And he drew the world, he drew the universe around us. We're at the center. Everything revolves around us. Everything's circling us. We're great. Copernicus said, not so much. Actually, that doesn't explain why sometimes Mars goes backwards in the sky. And for Mars to go backwards in the sky, it looks like we're going around the sun, and so is Mars. And Mars isn't going around us, and neither is the sun. So he waited right till the last moment to publish that, because he knew that his head would also be circling. And so he published that right at the last part of his life. That was about 5 centuries ago, and we're still not getting it. We still, every day, try to prove him wrong, that we are the center of the universe. So I had an extraordinary experience. I'm on the board of a new architecture school in my hometown in Sudbury, and it's a tricultural project with French, English, and Indigenous leaders. And this is one of the projects that students do. They go into the forest with an Indigenous elder, and they make a birch bark canoe in the way that it's been made for thousands of years. And it's an incredibly beautiful thing. They make it, they launch it, they have a kind of smudging ceremony. It's a beautiful thing altogether. The most beautiful thing, though, is that when that canoe is finished, if it breaks or if it simply wears out, is no longer useful, they simply take it back to the forest and leave it there. And by the way, the school has a forest as part of the school, which should tell you something. They take it back to the forest and they leave it there for the next generation of life. And so it becomes food for the next generation of life. Now I had an extraordinary, so I go up there every couple times a year and work with them. And I work with these Indigenous elders, and I started hanging out with them. And I began to kind of hear in the way that they talked, a different cosmology. Because I think I'm in charge, we're in charge. We own this place. They don't think that way. They think, and one of the guys, Chris Cornelius, said, we're related to the rocks and the grasses. I was like, related? To the rocks. Yeah, related. We're all part of life. And we come to life to honor and respect life with all the other species and all the rest of life. And I had the extraordinary experience of going into the jungle on a project with E.O. Wilson, who was maybe the greatest life scientist of the last half century. And he said there's really only one thing on the planet, and that's life. It has an experiment going in form, and we're one of those forms, that's all. We're not special, we don't have a kind of hall pass. We are subject to the rules of everything else. 99% of those species have already gone extinct, and we will, it's a cycle that's going through. And he said something that really struck me. He said, rock is slow life, and life is fast rock. And so this idea that we should put life at the center, not humans. If you go into any design school in the world practically today, they're teaching human-centered design. They're teaching that Copernicus was wrong, Ptolemy was right, it's all about us, we own it, and it's all about human-centered design. And we have to put life, instead we have to put life at the center. So that's what we are really committed to. That's what I really want you to think about over the next few days. So as you think about the possibilities, think about what we can do together, what we can think, what Sandy's asking for, inspiring us, challenging us to do. It's really about caring, and that's the core of design. At the center of design is a methodology of caring. For the citizen, that's what human-centered design is. But we want to expand that from the citizen to the community, and from the community to the ecology. Because empathy, ultimately, is our only hope for a positive future. Thank you.